Of course, there is need for coordination, but I think there is much more of a need to build a regulatory cadre in India which is efficient, which enforces, and which people are, fear to take decisions to game the system. I think that is the crying need of the hour, especially if infrastructure sector, hopefully after 2 years, begins to take off.
Okay, thank you. Let me come to Shanthi. You talked about the decline in social sector outlay as percentage of GDP, or maybe marginal increase, actually, 0.8%.
Yeah.
But if center were to say, the central government were to say that this is all because of the 14th Finance Commission, why blame me? Blame Dr. Reddy for raising the devolution of resources to the states from 32% to 42%. And ultimately, the states will have to chip in, and why blame the central budget? What would you say?
Why pick on social sector for this? See, yes, the 14th Finance Commission has, I've already said that it has straitjacketed the government. And apart from the money that they are giving to the states, they are also giving 2.87 lakh crores to the local bodies. That is another award of the 14th State Finance Commission. So yes, I mean, that has meant that not just social sector. Actually, I was looking through the budget documents. There are many other sectors also where the monies have been drastically cut off. But there are a couple of surprises, like telecommunications has received 4 times what it was receiving last year. Now, I don't know what is going on there. I don't know what the government is doing in the telecom sector. That is, I think the budgeted amount is something like 40,000 crores. So it's a huge amount of money. So central government would be right in saying that yes, we have less money. In fact, that is the reason I feel why they have passed on these functions to the state governments and the local bodies. Water and sanitation definitely is going to go to the local bodies. It already has started, and they will be responsible for providing WhatsApp. And we know what that might lead to, so that's the thing. So they would be right in saying, I don't have the money. That's true.
Okay, that's fine. Shekhar, you talked about agricultural outlay, money going in large quantities to various schemes and all that. Is there reason to worry the manner in which there has been no reform in the way the handout system has been going on for the last several years, and there's virtually no subsidies reform in this budget? Is that a valid criticism?
It's extreme. It's right on target. I think again, this goes somewhat to do we know what we are trying to fix? And again, in this budget, while it appears to be that there is a very large increase in the allocation to the rural sector, the largest part of it simply is a transfer from the Ministry of Finance to the Ministry of Agriculture, Farmers Welfare, and Farmers Cooperation and Welfare. So in that sense, even the transfer of resources is a bit of a sleight of hand. And much more importantly, to your point, and as I said in my presentation, the fundamental issues of the food and the fertilizer subsidy really doesn't need rocket science. We know that producer subsidies are distorting. We know the tremendous impact of free electricity on groundwater and the kind of impact it has had in North India. We'll see more of it in the rest of the country. This doesn't require rocket science, but we're not able to break through the patronage aspect of agriculture, where the state seems to know what's best for the farmer and doesn't do the basics that anybody who has any contact with agriculture knows. You need good transport links, you need good marketing, you need good water. And those are large things that an individual farmer is not able to do. All he can do with subsidized electricity is overuse it, overdraw groundwater, with fertilized subsidies on fertilizer, overuse the fertilizer. So we are straitjacketing the farmer inside. It's being used in another context, but I think these fundamentals are not being addressed. And perhaps it's because we don't know what we need to fix. Perhaps because the government doesn't want to take political risks, and not just this government, every government in the last 25 years perhaps. The MSP needs to be reformed. The Food Corporation of India needs to be reformed. These are all fundamental changes where we know what to do. The problem is nobody is willing to lay out a trajectory of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, by which time we could get it done. Let me just also very briefly say that what's missing, and here I'm resonating what Pratap said, there is no sense of urgency about our destiny. We're going to be a billion labor force or workforce by 2050. 1 billion. That's larger than any country in the world. Even in 2100, we're going to be something like 700 million working age population. And then we're all going to grow old. And a fundamental question that is not being dealt with the urgency which it deserves is India going to get rich before it gets old? Because if we don't get rich before we get old, the social conflicts that will lead to will be simply uncontrollable. And nobody's thinking, 20 years from now, where will we be if we keep going at it at this pace?
Thank you. Before we come to the floor, to the audience for ask questions, my final question to Rathin is that this is a post-pay commission budget. And if you look at the numbers, it's very difficult to get the numbers in the budget, but there is an increase for pay commission and pensions of around 93,000 crore, which is almost 0.6% of the GDP. Do you think that there is not adequate assessment of the pay commission impact and the challenges when we criticize the budget for lack of expenditure on the capital side? In a sense, the capital expenditure side as percent of GDP has indeed declined. But this is perhaps one post-pay commission budget where the government has managed to provide almost for the entire pay commission award for the next year, and yet stuck with the fiscal deficit, and therefore has accepted a marginal fall in the capex. Now, that's a government script, most probably. So how would you respond to that?
Well, I think the numbers I get are between, let me just say that when I was a member of the Pay Commission, we didn't have any, Government of India does not have accurate numbers for how much it pays its permanent staff. Luckily, 88% of government expenditure is on railways. There they have some idea. They hire a lot of policemen. They have some idea there. The rest of it, there was no idea. So even the government is guesstimating, plus minus 5%. So something between 70 and 90,000 crores has been provided in this budget.
93,000 extra.
Okay, if you're, because the minister gave a lower number yesterday, that's why I'm a bit intrigued. Yeah. Anyway, I had estimated, frankly, on 11% nominal growth rate, which the government has very kindly taken for next year, that it would, excluding railways, we would need about 0.5% of GDP. So it's well provided for. That is not a problem. Unfortunately, the public investment decline is a long-term thing. If you look at the medium-term fiscal policy statement, then you'll see consistent declines. I just want to take 1 minute, if with your permission, to respond to something Pratap said. You can look at this budget in two ways. You can look at it as a sense of profound pessimism, but you can also look at it in terms of what about Hanumantappa? I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. See, a budget is just that. It's a statement of the government's fiscal intentions. And what Shekhar is saying, what Pratap is saying, is that there has not been in this country, I think for 20 years, an articulated statement of government strategic intentions on where it needs the economy to go, which will then impact the budget. So within those constraints, I think this is a good budget. Let me give you one example. We must raise taxes and we must have a higher share of indirect taxes. Where is the agency there? The agency there comes from the fact that when you're able to get those changes happening on the basis of what is happening to your economy, then those changes come. The agency cannot be that the government takes a sort of Gosplan decision and changes its tax structure. It's not how it works. So prior to doing that, we will need to set our tax policy based on our tax bases. The first steps for that have been taken in this instrumentation, and therefore I think I would say that I'm not pessimistic about this, but I would join you in saying what about Hanumantappa in the larger context. Thank you.
Good. Now, may I invite questions from the floor, and I would request to identify yourself, and if you think you want asking this question to one of the panelists here, please identify him as well. Yes.
I told this to my colleagues.
That's right.
Santosh Mehrotra, Jawaharlal Nehru University. I very much endorse Pratap's view about the pessimism and the grounds on which he is pessimistic. But there is something deeper which I found very worrying. Before this government came to power, there was generalized recognition of the damaging effects of the inverted duty structure, the inverted tariff duty structure that has been prevalent for the last 10 years at least on manufacturing capacity in our country. We should all remember that in the 25 years since the economic reforms began, manufacturing contribution to GDP has not exceeded 15%. It has been stagnant at 15%. The contribution of manufacturing to employment has barely risen from 10.5% to 12.8% in the entire 20-year period. And one of the reasons why this is the case, and this is recognized by the chambers of commerce and industry, but they are divided right down the middle between those who are importers on the one hand and those who are manufacturers on the other. One was hoping that in 3 budgets, finally in the 3rd budget, there would be some serious real action on the inverted duty structure, which is actually leading to deindustrialization in the country. And are we going to get a reversal of that? I didn't hear anything from any of the speakers. I'd love to hear something from anyone who wants to take a view on this extremely serious matter.
Thank you.
This Chadha from National Council of Applied Economic Research. In fact, I would like to further reinforce what Rathin has said about the introduction of cesses, which, as you know, NCAER has a major study on GST, where the GDP itself would get a kick up of at least 1%. But my worry is that would it not make the government more lethargic in going to GST if the revenues are being raised from cesses, and how fast the government intention, and you clearly said that once GST comes into picture, cesses might be removed, but my worry is that once we start with certain taxes, the cessation of cesses may not be very easy. The second point I think Pratap has raised, I was quite confused about suddenly taking aback or suddenly confusing the middle class, as you referred to, with this EPF taxation, and people running helter-skelter in their thoughts, even if they are the middle class people. So some discussion on EPF taxation, because that is raising the revenue, a little more enlightenment on that. But the first worry is the GST and cesses confusion. The second question, Rajat, you mentioned about exports, and you said that it could have been 5%, it is 1.7% in ICRIER study. A bit more on, when you take these kinds of studies, do the right-hand side variables also take into account the trade agreements that are taking place elsewhere, even if not in India, but elsewhere, that might also have a great impact on India's exports potential. And I don't want to go into details, but yes, there is a hidden protectionism there as well if we don't study the what is happening in the rest of the world. Thank you.
Surjit, questions from you?
Actually, I have 5 questions / comments, but
Okay.
they will be specific. No philosophy there. First, on spending on health and education, and perhaps Rathin can enlighten us on this, but I think the problem in comparing Indian spending on health and education with the rest of the world is that there is a center spending, and most of the data that you get in your World Bank documents, etc., is that done by the center, not by the state. And thirdly, the additional problem with health and education statistics, comparative ones, is that private spending is not included in these statistics. So if you include center plus state plus private spending, and I'm not saying a bit about the quality of that spending and what that is getting you, but on education we spend something like 7% of GDP, and on health we spend something like 7 to 9% of GDP. The center just spends 1% of GDP on health, but that's not all the spending on health that's taken.